Best way to stay healthy is by making sure you're putting the right things in your body, which is easier said than done when you're trying to figure out the right diet and supplements to take. Good news. Cardimax Immune Booster has you covered. Right now, American Party Podcast listeners get 30% off your next 4 orders. Use the promo code AMERICAN at cardimax.com. That's CARDOMAX.com, helping you achieve your max. Well. Another show today we got. I'm actually drinking Cardimax right now to get me all hyped up for this interview because it is you're an author that most of our audience, I would say, probably libertarian. So on most fundamental political things, you would probably butt heads with them a little bit. But I think more than ever before in American society, people who are like, yeah, I feel this way. Like, I believe this, and this, but these crazy people on the fringes are really pissing me off, and nobody seems to be able to agree on reality anymore, and they're just sticking to partisan talking points. You're definitely one of the people that breaks through from that side. Look, I think one of your books that I really enjoyed was the environmentalist alarmist stuff, because it's just like cry wolf, institutional crying wolf, and it's not solving any issues, right? Like, there are issues that need to be solved, and they don't get solved if we don't elucidate them properly, I think. Michael Shellenberger is here today, one of my new favorite authors. I've read a lot of your stuff here recently. Introduce yourself to the audience and tell them what you do.
Sure. I am an author. I live in Berkeley, California. I am a longtime journalist, but also activist. Started out on the radical left, have become much more moderate over time. I've worked in the 1990s, I worked for George Soros's main foundation to advocate for the decriminalization of drugs and harm reduction. I also have been working really focused on the environment for the last 20 years. And last year, HarperCollins published my book, Apocalypse Never, Why Environmental Alarmism Hurts Us All, which argues that climate change is real, but it's not the end of the world, and that the best solutions are natural gas and nuclear. And then this year, HarperCollins has just published 3 weeks ago, San Fransicko, Why Progressives Ruin Cities, which is my effort to explain why progressives ruin cities, I guess. Including my favorite city of the United States, which is San Francisco, which is...
It used to be such a great place, right?
Yeah, I mean, it still is. I mean, we went to this show the other night in San Francisco. We live in Berkeley across the bay, and it was just amazing. It was magical evening, beautiful. You can avoid the chaos. It's possible. It's not easy anymore, but it's still a really special place. But yeah, I wanted to understand, how did, the people that say they care so much about, poor people, people of color, people suffering mental illness and drug addiction, how did we end up in a situation where we've just created so many more of those people and allowed them to self-destruct in ways that are destroying our cities?
Right. Yeah. I think some of the early conversations between I guess when postmodernism started to get or find its way into American politics a little more, mainstream than before in the 2010 to 2012 period. A lot of the arguments centered around there are these issues, and whether or not you think that you're actively causing any of it, the fact that it exists is something that needs to be monitored and addressed, right? It doesn't mean, forget about whether or not your intent is racist, quote unquote racist or not. If there are actions that we're all taking part of, or institutions that we're all enjoying that are disproportionately negatively affecting certain people, whether it be a racial group or a gender or whatever the fuck it is, that still needs to be addressed, right? Now, that's the same critique that the right or conservatives or libertarians are just reasonable people, I say, maybe more than anything, are trying to flip back on this very wild-ass progressive movement that's going on that doesn't seem to have roots in any kind of reality at all. Like, hey, look, I understand that you're coming from a position, and I give people the benefit of the doubt. I understand you're coming from a position where you're trying to help people and you see injustice and it makes you mad, you want to do something about it. But if your actions are actually having a negative effect, that's a problem and you need to realize it. And just because the other side, you don't like them that much, doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong. You know what I mean? This should be about getting the right answer at the end of the day, correct?
Yeah, I mean, and I think we're moving into a period. I'm feeling more optimistic than I have in a long time. I think the Americans are not, I don't think, at bottom, very ideological people. I think we're very practical people. I think we like to do what works. Even our philosophical tradition, that's really the only one that's indigenous to the United States, is pragmatism, which is that, we don't like dogmatic people. There are certain people in our society at the same time who go off on, religious crusades. And that's what has been occurring from the political left, and been growing in power over recent years and recent decades. And that's behind this idea that we should just let people, camp on the sidewalk, use drugs in public, defecate wherever they want because they're supposedly victims. And so this idea that we should, the first idea is just that you can divide people into victims or oppressors, which is just as dumb as it sounds.
Yeah. I mean, that's Foucault, right? I mean, we hear a lot about that dude these days from people that don't really understand. I think the right gets really confused because there are Marxist roots to a lot of this language, but it's not, what we're seeing now is not Marxism. Maybe cultural Marxism in some way, but it's evolved way beyond that. I mean, it's a mix between cultural Marxism and postmodernism, and then just the nanny state in general where, this aristocracy feels like they know better than you, so they should tell you what to do and you should obey them. It's very bizarre for me as somebody who grew up understanding that counterculture meant that we don't trust institutional authority because they've abused that power for so long, like as long as human beings have existed. And now it seems like the counterculture movement is bending the knee. I don't understand how that flipped so hard.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I mean, it starts with, like you said, I mean, basic Marxism is there's the workers and then there's the bosses, and everybody else doesn't really matter in terms of what happens in politics or in societies. Marx even called the people that we call homelessness is a propaganda word. Most people that are like living on the street as opposed to, in a shelter or getting some subsidized housing, that's different. But if you're living in a tent on the street using drugs all day, you're suffering untreated addiction and mental illness. And we create a euphemism by calling it homeless. Nonetheless, that's the kind of person that Marx didn't care about. Marx called those people the lumpen proletariat, just as kind of what it sounds. They're lumpen,
Yeah.
They weren't the ones that were going to overthrow the government and usher in socialism. That was the working class.
And
so
that goes to the point a lot of people make these days that the hardcore socialists from back in the day, they don't actually give a fuck about poor people. They just hate rich people, right? It's almost like that FDR statement, like be very wary of people who say government's bad, but if we get into government, we'll do good. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like that flip, like, don't trust them, but trust us under the same circumstances. And that's not really an argument. That's just like, we're better than them and we don't have any real proof for it, but just trust us.
Oh, for sure. I think that there's a real hatred of the system, a real hatred of society that is the motivating emotion for people that self-describe as anarchist or socialist or radical left. Certainly that was the case for me. Just to kind of view that, and it comes from an ideology in the sense that you kind of see bad things in society and you say to yourself, or other people say to you, that's a cause of this thing, this system that we have. And the system is what produces the victims. And in order to stop producing victims, we need to completely radically change our entire system. In some sense, it goes back to, I don't want to make it sound too sophisticated because it's pretty stupid when you think about it. But it goes back to Jean-Jacques Rousseau and this idea that people are born, in nature, everything's fine. But when we started creating cities and having societies, that's when everything went bad. And it's the opposite is really true, where, in nature, there's a lot more rape and murder, and it's pretty terrible and for your average person. And it's basically we become more civilized. But in that process of civilization, of civilizing ourselves, becoming less violent, becoming more feminine, becoming more peaceful, it's had the consequence of making us more coddled and also making us much more needing, since we give up our traditional religions, making us attracted to some really crazy new cults and religions. And we're seeing that both in terms of, this idea that the world is coming to an end from climate change, which is the thing I criticize in my last book. And then also it leads to this idea that that the people that are just really suffering addiction and mental illness are somehow oppressed by the society, or that their addiction and mental illness is caused by society because of capitalism or something like that. And that's how you get to this weird, what you might be calling cultural Marxism or postmodernism, where Foucault, his contribution here, and he's a major character in the book, as you know, he basically was like, mental illness, that doesn't exist. That's just the man trying to keep people who are sort of different down, or trying to divide the world between what people that are rational and irrational. And it was just a way of control, was his idea. It's just a way to control people.
I mean, it's social anarchism, right? I mean, for the most part is what we're talking about. Like there can be no hierarchies because nobody can be better than anybody else. And I think the confusion is, and it's one that, I mean, poor Jordan Peterson tries so hard to explain this, but he doesn't have any facial expression. So I think maybe people think he's a sociopath or something. But he's just like, opportunity of outcome and opportunity in general are not the same thing. Or I'm sorry, you can't. Equality of opportunity and equality of outcome are not the same thing. You can't expect the same outcome. Society does form, like all of any civilization has been about forming societies to protect ourselves against existential threats and to improve our lives, right? I mean, that's the foundation of all, I think, conscious interaction, is to try to figure out how we can best combine all of our efforts in a way that doesn't affect everybody negatively too much, but gives us the things we need to succeed in life. That seems to be, right? And ultimately, if you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, that means how can we spread our DNA the most efficiently and make sure it persists into the future, right? With families, or even, I think we've reached a point now where DNA, I think we need to start having ideas as, I think we need to start including our ideas as part of what we consider to be our DNA that we're passing down, right? Like good ideas are really important to society. Ones that are held up by time, that are tested and proven, and then once, like an immunization, once it starts to wear off a little bit, reinforced at some point. Because it's really difficult to create a very good system for people and let them be very relaxed and then expect kids to learn the lessons that they need to learn to fight off, to ward off, the bad shit that is just waiting for us to let our guard down. I don't mean people necessarily, just anything, natural disasters, famine, whatever it is.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, part of what I'm inspired by, and part of what inspired me to write the book, was I made a trip to Amsterdam, Netherlands, of course, right there in Northern Europe, across the channel from Britain. And it's such a well-run country. We went out drinking and out late, and then the next day, my female colleagues at breakfast were just almost angry that they were like, we walked home safely last night at 2 a.m. and there was nobody accosting us or yelling at us. There was nobody asleep on the streets. There's no homeless people. I mean, there's homeless people in shelters. And then we did find some people that make their way out, but there aren't these big tent encampments. There aren't people using drugs in public. So why is that? What are the ideas, as you say, that they pass down? And one of those ideas, a beautiful idea, I'd never heard it before. They have this expression. It's very funny. It's very weird and foreign expression, but they say, soft doctors let wounds stink.
Well, I mean,
and I was like,
that's...
I was like, do you mean they let the wounds become infected because they don't wash the wounds out? And they were like, yeah. So the Dutch kept a kind of toughness. They have a kind of, during the opioid epidemic that we had, everyone blames the pharmaceutical companies, and they certainly deserve a lot of blame, as do the regulators that allowed them to sell drugs, to give drugs away to everybody. But there was still also a culture where Americans were like, I shouldn't feel any pain. I should have no pain, as opposed to like, did you try taking 4 Advil? Did you walk a bit more? Did you try to get some good exercise? Did you look at your diet? Did you because opioids are really serious, and we're not going to just go give away opioids. And then when the Dutch would give out some opioids, they give out this tiny handful of opioids. It's like, here's 7. It's like there's some sense of restraint that they have managed to maintain in the culture that, for a variety of reasons, we haven't now. I mean, I do think this challenges some of the knee-jerk libertarianism in the United States too, because it means that it's not just everything goes. You don't just get to, there's a lot of people abuse libertarianism to mean things that I don't think many libertarians mean it to mean. But it's like I say, we shouldn't spend $1 hunting down people that are peacefully killing themselves, but nonetheless using fentanyl or heroin or meth in the privacy of their own homes. But you don't get to just sleep anywhere, and you don't get to, and we're not going to give you public money. We're not going to pay for you to camp and use drugs and destroy yourself either.
Well, it doesn't work. I mean, that's the main part of it. Whether I understand, for me, the battle between the right and the left, which I believe is an important one. It's a mother and father effigy, for lack of a better phrase. And it's very important that dialogue is able to happen in a civilized society, regardless. I mean, especially in a representative democracy like we have. It's very important for that discussion to be able to happen without the cry wolf shit happening on both sides, because it poisons the entire argument. There's no nuance allowed in an argument. There are phrases like all taxation is theft. Like, relax, dude. Just calm down. It's a social contract. I mean, if you don't like paying taxes, go to fucking Somalia, become a warlord. That's where, if you want pure, unadulterated libertarianism, go to Somalia, because that's where that is. And that is the ultimate recipe for disaster, in my opinion. But look, Americans, a lot of Americans, especially people that lean right or libertarian, kind of operate from the premise of anti-authoritarianism in general, in all of its forms. And I think they see things as authoritarian that aren't necessarily, which makes it much more harder to have this argument as well. My thing is, if we can't have these arguments where the left begins from the nurturing premise, like we need to take care of people, and the right begins from, well, here's our budget, and then we meet somewhere in the middle and take care of as many people as we can, then we're not really having political discussions. You know what I mean? We're just we're just hammering a piece of ground out and saying, this is what we're here. And I remember when that dude, that Ken Ham, that built the Creationism Museum in Kentucky or some shit, he's a lunatic, debated Bill Nye, who's not a real scientist, by the way. I'm not trying to fluff him up at all. He's a knucklehead. But the moderator in the debate asked both of them, what would it take for you to change your opinions? And Ken Ham said, well, I'm not going to change any of my opinions because I believe they come from the inexorable word of God. And Bill Nye simply responded, new evidence, which I think is probably the right place to be. Not that I like Bill Nye or anything, because I think he's kind of a knucklehead, but Jesus Christ, man, if new evidence doesn't convince you of shit, even the Bible says, study all things and hold fast to that which is true. Paul said that. Paul, who saw a donkey talking to him or some shit, so maybe he's not the guy to listen to, but that's not the point. The point is, we have to be in a meritocracy, because life is going to be a meritocracy whether we accept that or not, right? Like, it's going to react to things, nature will react to things, and shit's going to happen poorly, and if we pretend like it doesn't exist, then we're going to get fucked up by it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there has to be some sense of equality, and I think that what I really came to researching and writing San Fransicko was that, at least among progressives and the radical left, there's a real desire to change that. It's you mentioned, right, that our standard should be equality of opportunity, not equality of outcomes. That's something that progressives have a very hard time with, because obviously they believe that they have in their mind this idea that they can create a world without inequality, and that inequality results from injustice rather than from just natural variability, hard work. I point to this evidence, that if the intuitive sense that people have is correct. If you work a full-time job, you postpone having kids until you're married, and even you can postpone marriage for a bit, you're not going to be poor. Like, it's just not going to happen. Yep. So, now, but there's other problems, like kids come from, bad environments. That's not their fault. So you have to figure out how to deal with that. But that doesn't, in what I point out in San Fransicko, that merits often more strictness, not more coddling. And I point to this story where, I spent some time in India, but basically in poorer cultures, in fact, in the past, it was actually, everybody was having a harder time. Life was much harder, and they were stricter. And so we've lost that strictness. One of the questions is, how do you create that strictness for kids that don't get it in the family.
I've wondered that a lot, and I really would love if somebody, if some, not necessarily just one person, but some group of people, like I've listened to Alec Ross talk about this, hate, and The Calling of the American Mind is one of my favorite books. It's a great fucking book. And a lot of these authors that have kind of, been circling around this subject a lot, I would really love to see some primary research on it, which I know takes time, but also some of the smarter people that have dug into these things at the ground level, like yourself, Alec Ross, Peterson, talk about how do we simulate? I've talked to Brett Weinstein and his wife Heather about this quite a bit, actually. How do you simulate the circumstances by which people become strong and ready for life when that doesn't occur naturally? Like we're not working on farms anymore. You know what I mean? There aren't the same threats against us existentially that there used to be. And they say, they've got their thoughts on it. They've written their book on parenting. I think it's very good. But I would love to hear a very wide array of opinions on this, because I think it could be mapped on to not just parenting young children, but helping people that need the help in general, right? From any point in their life.
Yeah, well, it's in some ways it's the most important question. I'll confess that I had 3 chapters in San Francisco about the breakdown of the family. I ended up cutting them because it was so it's such an intense topic. It's such a personal topic. Everybody has, I'm the child of divorce. I am myself divorced. Mm-hmm. I've struggled as a parent, and I wouldn't ever want to come across as moralizing. Right. Or for any, at one point I had a conversation with some people about this, and I think I ended up hurting somebody's feelings who was a single mom. And that was absolutely not my intention. My intention, certainly, my mother did a great job, so I was like, I wouldn't want to insult my mother. You know what I mean?
Right. But we never know what the fuck's going on when we're doing it. I mean, there's no, people like to say, I've seen this funny meme, like there's no handbook to raising a child. There's thousands of books written on child rearing, but I don't think any of them really get to the crux of it, because they don't want to be too honest, because if you're too honest, you're going to offend some people, like you're talking about, right?
Yeah. But it seems like the thing I will, I ended up getting a lot of the strictness from my mom and my stepfather, and I know for a fact that the strictness taught me how to work hard, and that was essential to me being able to live to my full potential and have a relatively happy life. So we know that kids need strictness. That's okay. So that's not even in question anymore. So then the question is, what do you do if they're not getting it in the home? Well, obviously the only other place for them to get it is in the school. And so where I go to it is just that there are some kids that need to be in school a lot more and for more of the year. And these are kids that just don't have it at the family. And so that means that for me, I think that, and when I've explained this idea, I've had certainly some like upper middle class parents be like, well, I don't want my child, I'd like my child at home and my child on summer vacations. And I'm like, that's fine. Like I kind of go, your kid's going to be fine. You're putting your kid in camp, and you're like reading at home, and there's like all these things that you're doing. I'm talking about the kids that don't get that. Well, they need more structured time.
Not only more structured time, but half of these kids aren't getting fed unless those schools stay open over the summer, right? I mean, that whole, the 9-month or 9.5-month school year is still one of those legacy effects of American farming, right? Like we had kids off in the summer and we still do daylight savings time. Why the fuck are we still doing this shit that doesn't have any effect on real life anymore? It's very bizarre to me that we continue to do that. Now you say that if kids aren't getting that in the home, they need to get it at school or extracurricular activities, obviously, something like that. Now, how do you, for lack of a better phrase, institutionalize that? Because here are some of the issues that you run into, and you live in Berkeley, so you know this about Oakland. Food deserts are a big fucking problem. Transportation is a big fucking problem. So if those opportunities to go to school or to do the extracurricular stuff involves the parent, particularly the single parent in an inner city, having to transport their child somewhere on their own, it's probably not going to happen, right? Because they don't have the time to do it. They have to be at work, or they're working 2 jobs, or they're in school and a job, and they don't have time to take the kid there and provide for them at the same time, especially when cost of living is going up. So how do we figure out a way to institutionalize that stuff? I mean, the Big Brother programs and stuff like that do some of it, right? But we're still missing I would say the majority of these issues are still not being addressed properly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean the kids. I mean, obviously, we can't. We're not going to tell parents that they have to give us their kids for 12 hours a
Yeah,
day,
yeah,
or 11 months a year. That's just not something that
for
is.
sure.
It's not ethical. But you have to make it easy and also really attractive for the parents and the kids. And so, yes, we need schooling like that. I mean, obviously, if a kid's at school for 10 hours a day, they're going to be doing a lot of sports at that time.
Mhm.
If they're not super, I think they should have a lot of choices. I think kids just don't move enough at all in general. They're eating way too many carb snacks during the day and having terrible, insulin sugar cycling. They're not getting the discipline they need. They're not learning how to work hard. They could be getting more of a combination of the best available videos online for what we call flipping the classroom, where the teachers become more like tutors. They could be teaching each other more. So we should be seeing much more of that kind of educational opportunities for kids than we currently have. And it has to do with politics. It has to do with the power of the teachers union. It has to do with conservatives want this thing called school choice. The teachers union don't want that.
What is school choice for the audience?
That would just
you mean
be
like
where
what do they call them? Shit, the something schools, charter schools and stuff like that. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, but, I mean, it can mean it can mean a lot of different things. It could be you could be able to choose from just public schools. You could be able to choose from public or private schools. But the conservative idea has been more choices, and it could be done in different ways. I agree, although I have to say the issue is just that the kids that really need the better schooling often are the kids whose parents are not on the stick. They're not.
Right, yeah,
The
for sure,
parents
yeah.
are not the. So you have to. So when you want to kind of if you don't want to leave any kid behind, then what you need to do is we need to have a way to really encourage those parents to help us to get their kids into really amazing. I mean, just, education, it's one of those things where it's like it can be horrible and miserable and terrible, both the quality of the learning, but also the social experience, or it can be absolutely life affirming and life changing and beautiful. I think most of us have had experience with both of those realities, right? So, or at least some of us have. And so when you kind of think about what's possible compared to what we do now, it's depressing, but also inspiring in the sense that if you ever did do that, where kids from pretty rough neighborhoods and pretty broken homes had a chance to, you go to school and like that kid is going to have all sorts of natural talents that are going to be developed by that school over a period of years and going to find his purpose. He's not going to be out there gang banging. He's not going to be out there slinging drugs. He's not going to be out there, in some cases committing homicide. I mean, we're in a homicide epidemic in our country. It's an absolute tragedy. We saw homicides rise 30% last year, 50% in many cities. We all know who it is. The same people that have been committing high levels of homicide for a really long time. The victims are mostly black. 30 times more African Americans are killed by the civilians than by police. And yet, as I know in San Fransicko, the progressives only direct their concerns to the African Americans killed by the police, and that's wrong. And it's not just that we need more police, which I argue for, but we also, we need exactly what you're saying. You need to have much more serious, good schooling for those kids and get them away from the dysfunctional environments. They could be having nap time. Like, some kids, especially at younger ages, they should have a safe place to take a nap every day if they need to. If they're kids, it's so much better than having them at school for like 6 hours and then sending them back to really terrible environments when they could be at school for much of the day, becoming athletes, becoming artists, singing, learning how to fight. When I was just with Joe Rogan and he was like, mixed martial arts is brilliant for a lot of boys. Of course it is. Like, why is that not something that's built into our system? It should be.
It teaches them what Peterson talks about a lot, which is, I'm not sure about the language he uses, but he's like, you're a monster, be a monster, and then learn how to control your monstrosity. And what he means is that
it's beautiful.
What he means is that the entire evolutionary point, and I say this all the time, of masculinity is to provide and protect, right? And it doesn't matter if you got a dick or not. Like if you have masculine tendencies, you need to exercise them and then learn to control them so they can be effectual, so they can be used in a way that benefits yourself and the people around you. That's the whole fucking point of that shit existing. It's like having teeth and drinking smoothies all the time. Eventually your teeth are going to rot. right? Your digestive system is not designed to just consume liquid all the time. It doesn't work that way. It's like, what did Sagan used to say? It's far better for me to accept the universe as it really is, rather than persist in delusion, no matter how gratifying the delusion is. Reality, data. It seems like we've almost moralized our way out of paying attention to data. Well, that shouldn't be true. Well, fucking who cares what should or shouldn't be true? It is true, motherfucker. You got to do something about it. And I think that getting young boys that have some proclivity towards that, definitely exercise that at the youngest possible age. Like, my stepson's gay. He's not gonna he doesn't care about any of that shit. He likes to write and draw stuff and whatever the fuck else. He's not the kind of kid that's going to be into it, but the vast majority of young boys are, right? That's just how biology works. So
absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it's lovely to hear you say that. And I totally agree. We've demonized both manliness and womanliness. We've demonized masculinity and femininity. And yes, there's some. I'm a big advocate of gay rights. I always have been. Gay boys may not want to do certain things, but first of all, look, there's a lot of gay athletes, right? So it's like it's not like the stereotypes are even accurate, but it's more like I was a boy that actually had some amount of aggression that I like to get out in sports, but I also like to sing, and I like to read, and I like to write poetry, and so you kind of go. It's really, but yeah, I think you're right that, like, obviously, like, we shouldn't be like upset when like 90% of the people in mixed martial arts are boys, and we shouldn't be upset if 80% of the people taking cooking class are girls. Like, if that's what happens, that's okay. Like, it's like, but it also makes sure that obviously boys and girls are welcome in these different areas. But yeah, I mean, the schools are clearly where this needs to happen. And so the confusion has been, everybody gets treated like a cog in a system. Boys and girls are treated exactly the same. There's some expectation that they should be exactly the same. And so really, I think what we're talking about is creating schools that really bring out our full human potential in a lot of different areas, both academics, but also sports, music, arts, that aggression is embraced and channeled.
Right.
That the same thing for femininity, the same thing for all of these.
Because we need that stuff. We need it.
Absolutely. And repressing it creates really bad problems.
I mean, look at what happened. Like, if you want to see how that works in real time, look at the states that have abstinence-only sex education, and you will see that the rates of STDs and pregnancy are way higher than places that teach contraceptive measures. It's not even close.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a similar question on the drugs issue. I think we should have realistic conversations with kids about drugs, for example. But really what protects kids from becoming addicts is having these other life skills developed. Right. A lot of kids are like, well, I don't know how to do that, or that's hard. It's like, well, yeah, that's what your schooling is supposed to be for. And if you're actually in school a proper amount of time rather than staring at Instagram for many hours a day,
right,
some amount of that's okay. But, our kids are clearly not getting the education they need. And some big part of that is both exactly what you said. We still haven't come out of the farm schedule. But I think another part of it is that our teachers have embraced this idea that masculinity, that masculine aggression is bad, that girls and boys have to have the exact same outcomes. And actually, paradoxically, the kids that are suffering the most are the boys. Right. We see it in so many different ways that the boys that are suffering the most, lots of depression. A lot of that untreated depression is resulting in drug use and it's feeding the drug crisis. So these things are all definitely interrelated.
Yeah, definitely. I think I wonder I've got a couple of things I want to talk about. One is that I think there's a confluence of things going on here. We're in a microwave culture, so people have no tolerance whatsoever for any sort of discomfort, even short-term discomfort, which is very bizarre because most of all of human existence has been about just philosophy until postmodernism era has been about your stuff that is that you don't have to fight or struggle for usually isn't worth having in the first place. That's been a universal maxim in every major religion and every major system of philosophy since language existed, right? Iron sharpens iron. We've found a million different ways to say the same shit, right? But it seems like now people are like you said earlier, why would I need to feel any pain? That's not fair. What the fuck does that mean? Like I've been when I was in the military, after combat and stuff like that and getting treated for whatever the fuck else, I've had doctors tell me like, hey, let me know if you feel any pain. You shouldn't be feeling any pain. I'm like, that doesn't sound right. Like I'm injured. I should probably feel pain. And I was yelling at somebody about this on a show, on our Sunday night show, actually. Not yelling about it. We were having a conversation like, hey, if you injure yourself and it starts to swell up, keep an eye on it, but don't necessarily go out of your way to stop the swelling because the swelling does things for you, right? Like it immobilizes the joint in some cases. There's a utility to that. Your body just doesn't do shit for no reason. And I think we can learn a lot from just paying attention to the way nature responds to things. We seem to think that we're smarter than nature, which is the hubris of mankind has gotten us in a lot of trouble over the years, but that might be the dumbest one. That we feel like we can't just learn things from observing biology in motion. You think we would probably be into that. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that on the iron sharpens iron thing, you don't. I understand what you're saying by not reducing people to being a cog in a machine for sure, but we do have to observe ourselves from a utilitarian aspect in some way or another, right? Because we are. And from a child's perspective, they're still figuring stuff out, and maybe we still are too, but you have to find a way, we have to collectively find a way to challenge people at the intersection of their interest and motivation, right? So if somebody is into singing or if they're into jujitsu or whatever it is, we need to that's the goal, to provide them the opportunity to sharpen their iron in the way that they want to sharpen their iron, right? Because purpose is what matters in life. More than probably anything else. And the Foucault thing and Marxism kind of replacing traditional religion in America with a new religion. We're always going to have something that appears like religion. You know what I mean? And thinking that this I think a lot of people like Sam Harris got into it pretty quick after the four horsemen of the atheist apocalypse, whatever the fuck they call themselves. I like those guys, and I like Sam too. He shifted pretty quickly into neuroscience and sociology after that to try to figure out what it means to believe stuff, how to find purpose in your life, because I think he's a smart guy and he figured that out pretty quick. But I think the rest of academia is pretty far behind on that subject. Like, we need purpose. This isn't just about everybody can do whatever they want all the time and there should be no judgment. No, we need purpose in life. So why don't we just try to have some conversations like the one we're having today and figure out what kind of purpose has the best utility and the best efficiency for all of us, right?
Yeah, I agree so strenuously with you. It's the only thing I would add is that for me, it helped when I started describing my purpose as goals. It took me until I turned 50 almost. It took me a long time, but I was interested in. I finally realized that if I don't have like something pretty specific that I'm working towards at a given moment, I'm unhappy.
Right.
Like I need to be working on a book, on an advocacy effort to try to change some laws that are bad, preparing for a trip, focused on helping my kids in some way. If I don't have that, then I get depressed. And I think that that's the same for everybody. I think everybody needs that. And so I think we say purpose, but what we often really need to, because I think with the problem with, you'd say young kids, you go, or, even teenagers or college students, you go, what's your purpose in life? And they'll be like, fuck if I know, man. I have no idea what my purpose is. That's the problem. And so then then it's more like kids are being asked to do a lot, and so that's, I think, why the schooling and the skills building is essential, because it's kind of like, okay, well, why don't we, it seems like you need, what is your goal right now? And they're like, I don't know. And that's usually what they need help with. They need help with something very practical and specific. Obviously, some kids do figure that out, but I think in the gig economy, or people like me who are not like, it's not like if you work at HP, you work at a big corporation, you're like, well, my goal is to be a good employee and, I'm working on various projects at work and then I go home and I'm a good family man or whatever. But I think a lot of us, if you're working gig economy, if you're, have multiple employers over a period of time, it's less clear. You have to be constantly seeking those new opportunities, and that's why I think it's important to keep the goal in mind.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I do think it does require that we actually have systems and structure set up for kids and for others that are kind of lost, because it's often not obvious. I think a lot of people know that they need a goal, but they just don't even know what it should be.
Yeah, that's funny that you mentioned that. It really, because if you think about what we've replaced religion, which is, I guess you can, in most cases of religion, you can kind of reduce it to what's called soteriology, which is the doctrine of salvation. Like what are you being saved from, right? Whether it's original sin or in Buddhist sake, just existing in general, I guess maybe. But what are you being saved from exactly, and what's the process for being saved? That ideology it has a permanence to it, right? Because it presumes an afterlife in a lot of cases, and it consumes your life from the period at which you become able to comprehend it until you die. In a lot of cases, in most cases, actually. Now it's more. These goals are more transitory, right? They're a little more ephemeral. They're short. Like we go from one thing to the next, and it's reflected in the gig economy, I think, and we see it. It's certainly having a negative effect, but I don't see it as intrinsically negative. I think that it gives people a lot more breadth of opportunity. Think about 100 years ago, you had a couple of years to kind of figure out what you were going to do as a late teenager, early 20s person, and if you didn't figure it out and get on that road, you were kind of seen from the female side as an old maid, or from the male side as a failure, right? And this guy's a traveling salesman, he's a weirdo, or whatever the fuck. Now you have the opportunity to try 10 different things by the time you're 25 years old. Nobody blinks at that. I think that's a great opportunity. We're in a creator economy now, and people have more power to give themselves employment, right, than ever before, I think, in the American economy. And we're seeing kind of a great reset right now with certainly there are people who do not want to work menial jobs for low pay anymore, because we're seeing that happen across the board. Now, I think some of it is when you combine the lack of tolerance for any kind of short-term discomfort. People are like, well, why should I have to work that job for 2 years while I do this? Because that's how it fucking works, dude. You can't just do it today. But I think I think right now we have I'm very optimistic about that sort of thing too, as you are with the politics now. To hear conversations like people like you, Joe Rogan if you go on CNN, they're going to call him like a fucking alt-right guy that takes horse dewormer. But in reality, he's a thoughtful person that has really important conversations with people that are thinkers from all sides of the political spectrum. I wonder if we can circle back to your book for a moment, and reading all your book, San Fransicko, you touch on a lot of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of information in there. There's a lot of assumptions made by both the right and the left that are completely and demonstrably wrong. And tell me what homelessness is exactly, because it's a phrase that's used a lot, and I'm not sure that people really understand what it means.
Sure. Well, I mean, the word homeless is a propaganda word. It was actually around for several decades, but it gets used in the 1980s by advocates for more government spending and subsidies for housing as a way to kind of misdescribe people that are suffering, severe drug addiction and untreated mental illness. In the 1980s, we had a bad crack epidemic. Crack and alcohol was a big driver for why people, basically stopped working, abandoned their families, and lived on the streets. A real disservice was done by suggesting that these folks were just simply without housing, that was their main problem, as opposed to recognizing that there was an underlying addiction. And that continues today. Part of the reason I wanted to write San Fransicko was just to kind of get to the bottom of to what extent is just the fact that houses are expensive is the reason that people are living on the street. And the answer is very little. Like, you have really rich, high rent cities that don't have anybody living on the streets. Mm-hmm. Rents went up in many cities where homelessness declined. So once you understand it as a problem of addiction and untreated mental illness, it becomes a lot easier to understand. The proverbial woman who's escaping an abusive husband with her 2 kids, the person who's just down there lucky and living out of their car and not suffering from some underlying mental illness or addiction, we do a pretty good job of taking care of those folks through social service programs. The people that we're not doing a good job of taking care of are people that are suffering such severe addiction and illness that they live in tents on the street, use drugs publicly, defecate publicly, commit crimes to sustain their addiction. So really
and that's got to have, but sorry to cut you off, but that's got to have a multiplying effect, right? The removal of dignity in that situation, once that person in that shitty situation accepts that they no longer have any privacy or dignity, I think it becomes a snowball effect, and they just go rapidly downhill after that. Once that hilltop is summited and they no longer feel any sense of privacy or purpose or dignity, it's pretty much over after that, right?
Well, it can be if nothing is done. I mean, but you're right. There is a sort of moment where the addiction takes over and the addiction just convinces the person that they're just going to be an addict and they're going to that is what they're going to do. One of the characters in my book who's a recovering addict said that he had a moment when he was just like, fuck it, I'm going to just be a opioid addict. You know, he then switched to heroin and ultimately to fentanyl.
You're talking about the man with the wife, 2 kids and all that situation, right?
Yeah. I mean, but so, you can escape it. Now it's really, really hard because there's nobody, because all pressure has been kept away from getting you to quit. And it's to a large extent, the society is enabling you, at least in San Francisco and other progressive cities. But what I point out is that in Amsterdam, it's just not like that. You're not allowed to be a public drug addict. And in Portugal, if you commit crimes, you are mandated either some amount of jail or treatment, or you're put under a severe amount of pressure to get that. And that's my view, too, is, again, if you're just using drugs in the privacy of your own home, I don't think there's any taxpayer interest in bothering you, as terrible as I think it is. But if you're breaking the law, then, you have to enforce the laws and require people to get the care that they need. And so really what occurred is that progressives just really did a big disservice by misdescribing this as a housing issue and demanding housing as the main remedy. There is a role, but
I remember that because at the time, well, it was before I lived there, but I think somewhere around 2012 is when Salt Lake City implemented that, and they figured that they could spend about $12,000 a month on and give somebody, or I'm sorry, $12,000 a year and just give the person a home rather than spend, I think it was like $46,000 a year on combined medical expenses and blah 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 and all this other stuff, and then obviously enforcement keeping them locked up and shit. Obviously, it failed completely because it never addressed any of the actual issues. You know what I mean? It's
ironic because, of course, it's the progressives who insist nothing should be required of people they declare to be victims, that they themselves say that we need to address root causes, but they deny that addiction is the root cause. They insist that the root cause is trauma, oppression, victimization by this evil system. When in reality, and I show, trauma has declined, poverty has declined radically. We're richer than ever. And that's a big part of the reason why we coddle people and allow them to destroy themselves in public spaces.
What other scenario in life does taking, this is kind of a harsh example, but I pose the question to people quite a bit. Who loves you more, the person who watches and pats you on the back while you jam a fork into an electrical socket, or the person that slaps it out of your hand and calls you an idiot? You know what I mean? Like, one sounds harsher, and maybe there's some middle ground there as well. But I like the idea of authoritative parenting. We can't get into that today because it's a whole other fucking can of worms. But certainly people need to be. I mean, if we're operating from the idea that we need purpose or goals or whatever you want to call it in your life, then certainly if there is some kind of issue in our life, right, whatever it happens to be, whether it be a mental health thing or addiction or any other kind of not a personality disorder per se, but something negative going on in your life, like you're letting too many bad people in your life, you're letting yourself be treated improperly, whatever the fuck it is. If we're operating from that basic goal-oriented premise, then you have to set goals for people to get them out of that situation. That's how it works. Right. Yeah,
of course. I mean, addiction, it's not rocket science. I just watched I watched a podcast. I haven't read her book yet, but a very respected addiction scientist came out with her book. And, we know more about the brain chemicals. We know more about, some tricks to help to get to quit. But I mean, really, we've known that with people that are suffering from serious addiction, that some amount of intervention is required. We've known that for over 120 years. We have a whole TV reality show called Intervention that is all about this. I think most of us, I have 3 friends from high school that have suffered from addiction and homelessness. 2 are dead. 1 is alive, and it's hard. And he's not getting the intervention he needs. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But nonetheless, our system is not providing that intervention in ways that it should and it needs to. So I think, the opposition to expanding intervention, on the one hand, it's mostly come from the left, which just wants to coddle people. But to the extent to which, the right has been a part of it, they just haven't really been very proactive in proposing some sort of system to intervene. It's just been much more, Darwinian about it, which is,
right.
I find sometimes even of kids that are addicts, that the parents had a kind of laissez-faire attitude with the kids when they were young. They got addicted to drugs. And then when they got into trouble, they got kicked out pretty quickly. That's more common with white families. Black families tend to not kick the kids out as soon, which can be bad and good. But nonetheless, that I find I didn't really mention it in the book, but I find that pattern very American, including in how we do it as a society. So it's kind of like we let people really get screwed up for too long when we should have intervened earlier. And then when we do intervene, then it's just a really, most addicts don't need to go to prison. Most addicts don't ever, but some addicts need jail.
Yep.
And a lot of addicts need probation, and a lot of addicts need the threat of prison to get clean.
Well, That's talk about in the
simplest way I can say it.
In the book, you talk about the when subsidized housing was given the caveat of being required to pass regular drug tests, the success rate of keeping people off drugs went up exponentially. I mean, this seems like common sense, to a lot of people.
It is common sense.
It really does. I mean, if you think about it from the perspective of a personal trainer or a dietitian or something like that, if there's if there has to be a stick and a carrot applied, in a nuanced way for everybody, but sometimes people just need to be shaken back to life. You know what I mean? There has to be a reward for good behavior, and there has to be a punishment for bad behavior, right? That's just how
it's so simple. And part of the reason I wrote San Fransicko was, it's funny because when I was told that by my Dutch character, where he was like, Mike, you need carrots and sticks. It was so obvious and simple that it almost was disappointing to me as like an intellectual, as like an author and journalist. I was like, that's all it is, right?
It's like when you see a good invention, you're like, motherfucker, I could have made that shit. God.
Yeah, you're like, like it was on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah.
It seems obvious. So, San Fransicko, what I'm proud of having done in the book and the reason I hope people buy it is that many people's common sense about what should be done is accurate, actually. That hundreds or thousands of years of the idea that kids need both love and discipline, that the Beatles were wrong, that love is not all you need, that's just an acid-driven fantasy, that you actually need strictness, I support. I provide all the evidence to significant quantities of evidence to support that commonsensical view. And there's a part of me that as an intellectual, I was like, wow, it's really just that simple, and it's not just in a single time, it's carrots and sticks for all of us,
right?
Including I create carrots and sticks for myself, right? I'm going to go make myself run after our interview. It's going to be terrible. I hate it.
Well,
I'll love it after I'm done, though.
Yeah, that's what all the great athletes in history. We talk about this a lot too. Like there are similarities like between Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan that aren't just physical similarities, aren't styles of play. It is a mental toughness that finds ways, even if you have to make them up sometimes, to challenge yourself to accomplish things. And I think that's something that could be mapped on everything. If we I was an investigator for a long time in the intelligence community, and one of the things you ask comes from from the first century AD, I believe. It's called cui bono, who benefits. Like if you're
Right.
investigating somebody, you immediately ask who benefits from this going the way it did. And I think in the same way, we should ask whenever we're approaching some kind of new subject or a lifestyle choice, whether it be work or whatever else, like what are the risks and what are the motivations that I can build for myself or that exist institutionally that'll keep me in the lanes here. And then if I'm developing a new institution of some sort, how am I building, like if I'm a social media engineer, for example, because these people are off the rails with the way they're trying to manipulate human behavior, how am I trying to benefit people and how am I trying to, or what are the possible consequences and how do we avoid one and promote the other? I know they're trying to do some stuff here and there, but it seems like it's mostly been profit driven, you know what I mean? Which is an issue. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind for you yourself, if you're raising children, if you're a teacher. I mean, and to be honest, we're all teachers in some way or another. I say this a lot, but the first thing that a young girl learns about how she should be treated is by how her father treats her mother. And the first thing a young boy learns about how he should treat women is how his father treats his mother, right? I mean, what is it, like 83% of all communication is nonverbal? Like these kids are fucking smart. They're super smart.
Right.
And we lose sight of how smart we are just common sense wise because we overcomplicate things a lot even when we get older. But kids don't have all that stuff going on. They will pick up things almost immediately. And I really think that we need to make some kind of concerted effort to reposition ourselves as people who see things rationally and react to that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I do think there's just a kind of practical, common sense core to American culture. I actually think it's also in Netherlands in a different way. It's part of why I love the country. 1/3 of it is below sea level, by the way. So when you're forced to live below sea level. But yeah, I mean, I think there's got to be ways that we can bring back some of the strictness and discipline. We can bring it back into every aspect of our lives. There's a beautiful neo-Stoic movement alive right now. I see you promoting that. I see Joe Rogan. There's books, there's podcasts. The Stoics had it right. They really did. The fundamental Stoic insight, we actually have it. We call it the Serenity Prayer in the United States, which is having serenity around understanding the things that you cannot control and being able to have the wisdom to know the difference. Yeah, it's in Alcoholics Anonymous. I still struggle with it personally. For me, it's one of the most profound things in the world because I still remain a bit of a bleeding heart. But
there's ways
you always
around
have to ask
right?
yourself, well, you have to ask yourself, what is in my control?
Yeah.
What am I able to do? And having to let go of the earlier, more juvenile, more youthful grandiosity.
Right.
I can write a book. I don't know if my book can fix the situation.
Yeah,
that's sort of the difference, right?
But you can expand that beyond, because I think a lot of people feel helpless, and there's two routes that I take. One, you're not going to personally solve homelessness, probably. You're not going to solve hunger, but you might be able to solve this guy's hunger right over here, right now. You know what I mean? So there's small things you can do. The other things you can do is act as a motivator and force multiplier. It's something that we learn in the military. Like, I can't go fight an enemy 3 times my size necessarily, but I can recruit, locally train, and then now I'm a much bigger force than I was before. It's really important. So you might not be able to affect change in something that's affecting you right now, but you can probably find someone or some group that does have that ability, right? Just because I can't do something doesn't mean that somebody else can't. And I think we need to look for those opportunities to elevate other people who might be better at something than we are, and not take it personally when they achieve something that we can't. You know what I mean? Because it's not how life works. We're not supposed to be great at everything.
Absolutely. I end San Fransicko by arguing that we do need to grow up a bit as a nation. There's real questions about whether our republic is going to survive, I think. I don't think that's just, I used to think it was just hyperbole. But I do think there's real questions. I think America is in some real trouble. At the same time, I don't feel like, and again, this is not a scientific question. It's not clear what the evidence exactly is, but I personally don't feel like the American experiment is complete or finished. In fact, I think it's incomplete in the sense that, and this is how it ends, we love freedom in the United States, and I love it more than most people, perhaps. I demand it for my personal life and my political views. I'm very fussy about not wanting to be defined in particular ways. At the same time, that you have, for that to be possible and for us to realize that freedom, we have to take responsibility. And it's both individual responsibility, but it's also, so stop coddling, but it's also, we're not going to let our opioid companies overprescribe opioids. We're not going to let our doctors do that. We're not going to let our regulators do that. And some amount of social responsibility is necessary. And for me, that sounds, I feel like it works in this context, which is to say, what are the big values, for Americans? One big value is clearly freedom, and another is responsibility. And it's
well, you can't have one without the other, right?
You can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
I really fell in love with this. Again, I come from the left, but I'd always heard conservatives say, freedom's not free. I think it comes out of the military, right?
Yeah.
Freedom's not free. I love it. I really came to fall in love with this because it's so. On the one hand, as a former progressive, I would always hear a kind of militarism in it,
Yeah,
which
but
was
it's not all just about fighting, right?
But it's not just about fighting, right? Exactly. What is it? Why is it? You must have. That was it. So it comes out of the military, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think it's more from Toby Keith, if I'm not mistaken.
It was like a big country music.
Yeah. No, it was.
Okay, it's a country music song.
No, but it's an idea that you have to sacrifice for things, and people. I think the military community probably latched onto it because it's a little more obvious.
You got to have a military.
Yeah,
you got to have a military.
But it's also obvious from the left's perspective. So if you think about government, the right expects there to be military, right, to protect us, and the left expects us to have things that are social services like roads, for example, to fucking drive on. And so the phrase "all taxation is theft" is one of the more ignorant things that I've ever heard, because I agree that we have a spending problem in this country. It is out of fucking control. But if you want this liberty that you so desire, there have to be institutions that protect that liberty. And when I say protect, I don't just mean from physical threats. I mean from hunger, from weather, from other like certain types of technological threats, like China stealing our intellectual property all the time and weakening our economy. There's all kinds of things that need to happen there. And it's not just about picking up your fists and fighting somebody. Sometimes it's about making sure that the lights stay on. You know what I mean? Which I think it seems reductive to a lot of people. Like, of course the lights are going to stay on. That's because the lights have always been on for you, right? You don't know what it's like with the lights off. I've been to those countries where the lights go out. You don't want to fucking live like that. I'm telling you.
And there are countries where people are not taking responsibility. I mean, I think that, I end by saying, I love this psychologist, Viktor Frankl. He really is one of the founders of the self-help movement in the United States, but he's also the one that says you have to have a purpose, you have to have goals. He wrote Man's Search for Meaning.
I've got that.
But I end the book by noting that it's 10 million copies, a beautiful book. It's about how he survived the Holocaust. He survived the concentration camps by creating goals for himself in the camps, proving definitively that mentality triumphs everything.
Right.
And so the idea that you're determined by your circumstances, he disproved in this really brilliant artistic way. But he loved America. He's Austrian, but he loved America. He'd come here all the time, lecture here, but he would always say, you have a beautiful Statue of Liberty on the East Coast, and you guys, that's what we love about America. We want that to be true, but for it to be true and complete, you need to build a Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast. And so that's how San Francisco ends. Is it's like, let's build a Statue of Responsibility, and people will be like, it's just a symbol, and you're like, yeah, that's right. It's a symbol of where we need to go and where our heads need to be pointed right now at this moment, because we have a lot of freedom. But that's in some ways also under threat. And I think it's under threat fundamentally because we're not, each of us in our own lives, but also politically taking responsibility, and we need to start doing that. Completely
agree with that. Before we get out of here, you talk about Northern Europe quite a bit. you also mentioned Miami and the way they've dealt with homelessness as well. I've actually met with the mayor of Miami to discuss, in particular, the way they've addressed and their very high success rate of veteran homelessness. I mean, it is a nominal amount of veteran homelessness in Miami at this point, whereas that was not the case just 10 years ago. So I wonder if you can, just for the audience's sake, so they can go research some of this stuff later, give a couple of points on what we can learn from Northern Europe and Miami and other places that have done these things successfully, I guess.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. We need to have a shelter first policy, shelter first, not housing first, shelter first, so people are not camping outside. Treatment first. We need to have universal psychiatric care. There is no free market for people with schizophrenia or drug addiction. They're just going to have to get they need to get rehab. They need to get the care they need. And then you need housing earned. So to the extent to which we're subsidizing housing for people, and some people need subsidized housing. My aunt had schizophrenia. She was in a group home. That's just what she needed because she was mentally ill. Right. Those folks, they need housing, but it needs to be earned. There needs to be responsibility. There needs to be reciprocity. That's the way this has to work all the way up and down the whole system. In California, we need to centralize it. We need to have a hierarchy. The only way things get done in society is through hierarchies. So we need to have the states take over in California from the counties, which have failed because they can't deal with this highly transient population. And that's basically it. I mean, you need to make these decisions as a society that we're not going to have public camping. We're not going to have public drug use. There's going to be consequences for these behaviors. We're going to enforce the laws. We're going to have the care that we need for the people that need the care. But there's going to be tough love and there's going to be discipline, and people are going to have to. The goal is to work people towards independence, not dependence.
Right. That's one of the primary functions of the unemployment insurance programs in Northern Europe as well. Like there isn't an endless amount of unemployment insurance, but the government works pretty hard to make sure that if you need to be, you will get retrained in a new field and get a job. Like they take it personally there. And it's not a matter of a nanny. They don't treat it in the same way that we do here where it's a nanny state. They treat it in like, hey, this is going to be a problem if we let it persist. So we're going to solve the fucking problem in a way that makes it stay solved. Like we're going to solve this issue in a way that it doesn't pop up again, or at least not en masse like it does here. I mean, I wonder what percentage of people go on, both pre-COVID, go on unemployment, then get employment, and then go back on unemployment. I bet the recidivism rate is pretty high for that, if I had to guess. Really appreciate you coming here today. I really enjoyed having conversations like this with people who are. I'm not really on a side or another. I kind of take everything as it is, but a lot of people feel more closely identified with one side or the other, and that's fine. I enjoy having these conversations. I really appreciate. One of the things I say most is that if you are on a side, whatever it happens to be, make sure that, like every major religion has ever said, take the fucking plank out of your own eye before you pull the splinter out of somebody else's, or whatever, however it goes in whatever your chosen religion is. So people that hold themselves and their own side, for lack of a better phrase, I know side is reductive, but hold that accountable is so important to maintaining the legitimacy of any discourse that might happen. So we really appreciate you coming today. Tell us again.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir, absolutely. Tell us where we can find you and where we can find your book, and the other book as well, the environmentalism one. Just
sure.
Give them the name.
Yeah. So Amazon sells both books. They're both. Great background on my broader views, but basically Apocalypse Never came out last year, subtitle Why Environmental Alarmism Hurts Us All. San Fransicko, Why Progressives Ruin Cities, also on Amazon, both on Audible. Unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to read them, but hopefully my third one I will. And I'm on Twitter at Shellenberger MD. I'm not an MD, but those are my initials. And
You're stealing
an unfortunate accident. Yeah, no, unfortunate accident. Schellenberger was not available, nor Schellenberger M. But yeah, would love to hear from readers and viewers, and yeah, always great to make the connection.
So there's the challenge, guys. Go to wherever you buy books and listen, and then go talk shit to Michael on his Twitter account. Just love it. Have a good time, guys. Thanks again for showing up today. We appreciate it. We close.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I appreciate it. We close every show by telling the audience we'll see him in hell, because that's how we talk.
Nice.
So we'll see you in hell, guys.